So it's wonderful to have Richard Green on this podcast. He is a documentary filmmaker, and today we're chatting about his recent documentary titled "I Know Catherine, the Lock Lady." Hello, Richard. Welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having us. I'm excited to talk about Catherine anytime.
Certainly.
It's been
Yes.
an exciting process.
Mhm. Yes. I heard it about the documentary through a friend, Jesse. He runs the Instagram account. Was it Sign Peaks on
Ah,
Instagram? He makes mashup of the television series Seinfeld and David Lynch's Twin Peaks.
yeah.
And he told me about you and the film. So I was naturally intrigued.
Yes. Well, Sign Peaks is pretty clever stuff.
Certainly.
Interesting in how often there are overlaps and similes and such. It's pretty cool. Very, very cool site.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Let him know you said that. And yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So tell me about your journey as a filmmaker.
Wow, nobody's asked me that. Thank you very much. Good question. I grew up in the 50s. I'm born in New York and Brooklyn and moved out to California at around 6 years old. And I think I was always just enraptured by story, always. I can remember as a child, a young child, creating elaborate cowboy and Indians games or cops and robbers games and telling my friends where to go and working on how to die effectively. So much so, especially in those days in the 50s, it was very Western California, Western oriented. A lot of the TV shows, Gunsmoke, and all these different shows, Wild Bill Hick, I can remember hundreds of them, Wyatt Earp. And I remember I got on a horse in California. I knew how to ride because I had been watching guys get on and off horses and ride and have what their attitude was. So I already had the confidence that I knew how to handle this horse, and I did. This massive horse, I was just riding around, galloping all over the place. And I think wanting to make films, wanting to tell stories is something that developed early on. The first time I ever put my hands on a camera, I was in high school. And it was a Super 8 camera, and I made my first film, which was kind of segmented. Part of it was animation, and part of it was live action, and there was some double exposure stuff. And we had no sync sound on these Super 8 cameras. So I remember recording live the soundtrack with my friend on bongos and pots, and just it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed. I've always also been an actor. I've played so many roles. But there's something about when you're acting, you're just in that character. You're a piece of the whole. And it's a great experience. If you're working with good actors and good script and a good director, you feel, you create a new world. And I always like the research involved as well. But with a film, you're making something, you're shaping it, you're thinking about how perception. When you're acting, you don't want to be thinking about how the audience is going to feel when you turn and do this look. You want to turn and do that look because you're affecting the other character. It's all internal. There's no external thought about the processes of emotion or the processes of thinking or suspense. But as a filmmaker, you have that ability to really tweak everything. I was talking to somebody recently about this, and it's if you're shooting in 24 frames a second, which is film and what a lot of video editors now work in, you're making 24 decisions every second, and it seems like, oh, you couldn't be doing that, but you are, because if you try to dissolve from one image to the other, you can see the difference between one frame, just 1/24th of a second. You can see the difference. You certainly know that you can hear it because if there's just a little click, right, it might take one frame, but it disturbs that beautiful sound that you might be looking for. So you're making decisions 24 frames every second plus all the different layers. You got the visual and the audio and the sound effects and the ambient sound and the dialogue, all of those little. So it's hundreds and maybe millions of decisions go into any film. And I like that process. Um, the short film that I made when I was in high school, uh, I started writing screenplays at that point, but I stopped. I had gotten into a career of acting, and I had a theater company in San Francisco, and I was sort of famous in San Francisco for doing improvised verse in the streets. That's how I know David Lynch is because of this act that I used to do with an English accent because I developed it at a Dickensian fair. Um, when I was 20, I left the theater company in San Francisco, um, and I came down to Los Angeles to see my folks. My plan was to go spend a year in Europe. It was 1973. In those days, the hippie era really was like 60s, 70s. It was like middle 67 to like 77 or something was when we were all, hippies and marching. And part of that was going to Europe for a year and just traveling around, North Africa and Asia, a little bit of Asia. And I stopped in LA for a short time and got a job at a new theater, the Mayfair Music Hall. And one of my compatriots from San Francisco also got hired, and she was very close friends with Catherine and Jack Nance, and they had an apartment up in Beechwood Canyon in Los Angeles. And for those 6 or 12 weeks that I stayed in LA before my year in Europe, I hung out with David and Catherine and Jack. That's how I got to know them. And David used to watch me do my improvised verse at the Mayfair Music Hall. I had a drinks budget, and Jack Nance really liked to drink, and David didn't mind a couple of tokes, tipples, or whatever you'd call them himself. So they would come. I don't know how many times they came, but it was great to have them there, and it was great to get to know David and Jack. Jack was the funniest guy I ever met, and David was just such an interesting character, even in those early days.
Oh, yeah.
So, filmmaking journey is what you asked about. I wrote my first screenplay in that year in Europe. It was a silent comedy called AWOL, about a guy who doesn't want to be a soldier, and it was a silent comedy. And then when I came back from Europe after a year, I needed to stay in Los Angeles because my father had gotten ill, and he'd also invented a really interesting tech device, and he needed my help to sort of protect him from the sharks around him and also get him healthy. So I ended up staying in LA and going to Cal Arts. They offered me a really, really generous scholarship for a 3 year. It was a 4 year program. They gave me a year's credit because I couldn't give me the scholarship money for the fourth year. I was broke. And Cal Arts was an extraordinary experience. I made two films there as a director. I did many, many performances there. The films got me an offer from AFI and an offer from NYU Graduate Film School. And because I had been an acting student at Cal Arts every night, I would be in rehearsal while all the film students were looking at all the classic films in the Bijou Cinema, right? So I never saw The Bicycle Thief while I was at Cal Arts. I had to wait, and I figured if I went to AFI, I would get more work as a screenwriter, but I wouldn't see the films because there were no revival houses except for the New Beverly in Los Angeles in those years. But in New York, there were tons of revival houses. I could see The Bicycle Thief. I could see classic, European and American cinema. So I opted for NYU because of the opportunity to see films. I didn't stay there very long. They had a scholarship issue, and I just couldn't afford it. So I went to work for the Public Theater and wrote my second screenplay, which I'm waiting to make still, The Doomsayer, about a hippie on the bum who thinks the end will come in 7 days. Um, so, I mean, that takes me up through, I guess, through the late 70s. I then got this wild idea to do disco had just come out. Saturday Night Fever was very popular, and I really didn't like disco music. I was a big swing fan and the sort of the subtleties of Django and Ellington and such. And so I came up with this film called The Next Step, which I thought was going to be the next step after disco. And it was about the zigzag club that zigzags from the 30s to the 80s. And the man leads half the time in the dance and the woman leads half the time. It was a really cool project that I spent 7 years on trying to make it as a film. Never got there. Did have an extraordinary experience, tragic on some levels because we failed miserably. But my first feature film was about that, called 7 Years Zigzag, telling the story in swing and in rhyme. It's got 15 original songs. It's all in narrated rhyme. An unusual film. Simultaneously with that, I made I Don't Know Jack as a producer, executive producer on that, put it together in my studio, hired a 23-year-old kid who'd come up with this idea to direct his first feature, and he did a fabulous job. If you've seen David Lynch Presents I Don't Know Jack, it's a wonderful, dark film, very different than I Know Catherine the Log Lady. And subsequent to that, I've developed a lot of projects, a lot of really bigger projects, done a lot of video for people, made a lot of voiceovers. Had a great career as a voiceover actor. And, I got to play with David in Mulholland Drive. I'm the magician from the Club Silencio scene. And 10 years ago, when Catherine died, I knew that there was a great story here to be told. Once I heard that she had died just a few days after completing her scenes as the dying log lady, I just thought there's a movie here. And I believe I was right, because this is my third now feature, my second as a director. And it's being very, very well received, as it deserves to be. The story is fabulous and the people in it are fabulous. I just had to keep it all together as a director.
Certainly. Yeah. Okay. So, why should people see I Know Catherine the Lock Lady, especially those who are not familiar with, well, the Twin Peaks universe or the character that the title refers to?
What another very good question. Um, well, I sincerely believe that they should see it. Uh, I think the primary reason to see it, and this is for everyone, this is not for Twin Peaks or David Lynch fans, although I think we create a world, or we give a glimpse into the world of Twin Peaks, into the world of David Lynch, that will be fascinating to almost anybody. I'm not a big, I like Star Trek, but I'm not a massive Star Trek fan. But you give me a real story set in the world of Star Trek, I'm going to be very interested because I get to see both that real story. This real story is one that's just so inspiring. It's totally changed my way of looking at life because it's all about how we deal with death. It's all about, Catherine finds out she's dying of lung cancer just weeks after David and Mark announced they're bringing Twin Peaks back. And Twin Peaks was an incredibly important part of Catherine's life. The character of Log Lady was invented on the set of Eraserhead, where Catherine was David's right-hand man. And so years later, they're bringing it back 30 years later. This doesn't happen very often, and especially with an auteur director like David Lynch, where Showtime was forced to give him complete editorial control over this project, which I think was a brilliant move on their part, and I think will be benefiting them and our culture for years to come. David went really far out on season three and created something unusual. But coming back to why people should see it, everybody deals with death, whether it's your own or someone close to you. And this film really addresses what that means and how to do it. And Catherine's life was very inspiring. And she developed this incredible cadre of amazing people. We're talking about Oscar winners and Pulitzer Prize winners and just real good people, really smart, caring doctors and friends. And they tell this story of why they all came together to help her accomplish her final wish. And just even talking about what we do, quoting people from hospice about what's the best way, talking about the books that are written about this, and talking about what happens after death. Different people in the film have a different perspective. David believes we're all still around and we'll all see each other again, and he believes it. I'm not sure. I don't know. Um, but I think people need to see the film because it opens up a conversation that we all should be having, and especially in American culture, from my perspective, we don't have enough. Death is shrouded with just sadness and blackness and darkness, and we set aside a few days to memorialize someone, and then we cry for months alone. Whereas there's a celebration to be had about life, there's reflections to be had about all the relationships, but also there's an appreciation to, I think, um, to just understanding that, and the Tao Te Ching, which I subscribe to and I enjoy reading a lot from Lao Tzu, talks about not really being able to appreciate life until you can accept and celebrate death, that there's an end to everything. I don't think I love a good steak with some garlic salt on it, and some, really rare. That's like wonderful for me. And I love having a nice piece of steak, but I can't eat 3 pounds of it. At some point, you need some closure. And I think this film deals with death in a really positive and productive way, and allows us to celebrate life. And I think people that see it will come away as deeper and happier people, is my
Yeah,
opinion.
certainly. And I certainly get that impression too, having watched
Well,
the documentary.
thank you. Did you enjoy it?
Certainly, it did. Yes.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yes, I'll give you the reasons, throughout the conversation.
Sure.
Um, but I should mention too that, Twin Peaks, for those who do not um, know it, is a show that at its center deals with death, right? Because the central mystery is the rather gruesome death of a high school girl and the effort to figure out why that happened and who did it. So, I guess this is a more philosophical than artistic question, but where do you think Catherine E. Coulson is now?
Well, I'm one of those people, again, referring back to the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Um, in the Tao Te Ching, in the beginning of it, and I'm quoting it badly as anybody who tries to quote the Tao Te Ching does, he who knows doesn't speak, and he who speaks doesn't know. But let me try and speak and know a little bit. The Tao Te Ching says there's darkness within darkness, and don't worry about the darkness. Don't worry about answering these questions that we can't answer. Worry about living your life here and now. I've always been, rationally, scientifically more oriented. Um, I didn't grow up in a religious household. So I've, used to ask me in the 60s, what sign are you? And I would say skeptical rising, right? Because I always kind of felt like, well, you don't know what this is, and it sounds like a bunch of hooey, and you read the astrology in the newspapers, and it's just, it's pablum, right? Doesn't seem like anything real. But since this film, due in part to an incident that happened just before we finished raising the money, I've accepted that there's more in the world than I understand, as Hamlet says to Horatio. More in the world that is, considered in your philosophy is a bad quote of that. And where I feel like there's something going on in around this project and maybe within my life that I can't account for. And so I have this image in my own head of there's a balcony behind me, and in that balcony is Catherine, and she was joined by Donna Dubane, who's in our film, who died in December of last year, and I was very close to her and spent a lot of time with her at the very end of her life. And then David in January, he passed away. And then another theater company member from those early days in San Francisco I was close to, Cab Covey, he passed away. A few months later, Rebecca Del Rio passed away. And I have started just sort of accepting that maybe there's a balcony of people behind me that want us to succeed with this film. And that all the really unusual, strange events that have happened for us are being directed on some level by them. Now, rationally, I cannot support that. I can't justify it. I can't, I can't prove it for sure. And I don't necessarily fully believe it. It's hard for me to take it seriously that there's a balcony looking out for me up there. But every time I worry, something comes up to sort of help us on this project. Um, and I at least now acknowledge that there may be some other force operating. Now, I don't, and I talked to that force. I'll tell you the incident that started this for me. Going back about 15 years ago or more, 20 years ago, 20, wow, almost 30 years ago, my father passed away. And we were very close. And a day or two after, I was sitting on the deck behind my house where I used to sit with him and talk about stuff. And I remember thinking, well, can I talk to the dead? I mean, if I talk to him, is he going to respond? And, I'm a trained professional actor with a very, very vivid imagination. So if I want to just sit there and look at this video screen where I see you and imagine horns coming out of your head and, you're wearing a yellow marching band suit, I can see that in my imagination. And when I try to talk to my dad, I realized this is no good. My imagination's too strong. I can't tell whether I'm imagining this or I'm talking to him and he's not answering. And I let it go. A year later, at the unveiling of his tombstone, I took my 4-year-old son at that time, 4.5, and he wanted some lemonade. So I went back across the field, the green grass of all these tombstones in the ground to get this lemonade for him from the car. And as I'm walking back, I remember this trying to talk to my father and realizing how silly I felt. So I remember I sat there and I went in my head as I'm walking back. So Pop, which is what I call my dad, if I ask you, if I talk to you and you then respond, how do I know that it's you? Will it be you? If I talk to you and I hear your voice in my head, is that you or my imagination? Is it you? And I ask this question, if I talk to you and I hear you in my head, is it you? And I heard one word in my head, easily could have been my imagination, but it was a word that if you would have asked me to write what my father's one word response is, I couldn't have done it. It was the one word that my father would say in that situation. I said to him as I'm in my head, Pop, if I talk to you and you respond, how do I know is it you? And the response was, maybe. And I laughed and realized that, I was never going to know. So now go 30 years later or 25 or whatever it was, we crowdfunded this initial film. We did very well. We got $292,000 to start this project. We've tripled that budget in the last 8 years, but happily so. I think it's on the screen. And but we were a week and a half out or a week out. And in Kickstarter, unless you get it all, you get nothing. You got to get every penny or they don't give you a penny. We were, about two-thirds to maybe 158 grand or something like that. And it's a week left to go. And I'm sitting in my studio alone and I got completely ripped. I'm not a drinker. I do use cannabis on occasion. And I was cannabised to the wind. And I was loaded. And I went into the part of the studio where we had boxes of Catherine's materials and stuff we'd gotten from her daughter. And I started talking to her. Just, what the hell? Let's just, Catherine, what do I do? How do I'm scared? If I don't raise this money. And I didn't hear any response or anything, but at the end of putting all this out, I broke down and started crying. And I cried like I'd never cried since I was a young child. I just poured out. 'Cause I think it was mostly my anxiety and also my hope because we'd come so close and this seemed so important to me. And I was crying because I was afraid and whatever. But at the end of this, maybe 10, 15-minute crying jag in a big studio that's soundproof, that nobody else is hearing, I could just let it go. At the end of that, I just said to myself that if we raise this money, I will talk to Catherine. Not that I'm going to hear anything, but that I would talk, I would do the active part that I could do, which is talk. And over the following 7, 8 years that it took us to get this to this point, didn't do it a lot. I never heard a direct voice back, nothing talking to me, not Catherine going, yes, good job, Richard. Um, but a lot of stuff has happened. And I realize that a lot of the people around me are very open to the idea of people existing after their death. In our film, as you know, David Lynch, who's, one of the smartest and certainly one of the most creative people I ever knew, um, he believes that, we're all still around and that we'll see each other again. I don't know, but that I'm open to the possibility and that I'm very grateful to the balcony, whether they exist in the world or in my head, or if that's it is the same thing. I don't know. So I don't know where Catherine is, but if there was a possibility for her to be actively involved in this world as a spirit, I bet you she would be. It's just who she was.
One of the things I
Did that
appreciate,
answer your question?
I thought so, yeah, and more. One of the things I appreciate about the documentary is it shows the extent to which Catherine's involvement in whatever project she happens to be in. The television show Twin Peaks is her best known project, of course, but she also does assistant DP work in Cassavetes movies, which are he's one of my favorite directors, as well as this play by Robert Schenken, her acting role. She makes her involvement is in some ways indispensable to the success of these projects. And I like to focus on Twin Peaks because that's what the title of your documentary alludes to. Why is this TV show so special, and how does Catherine contribute to its specialness?
Man, I don't know what you do all day, but your questions are excellent. I've been doing podcasts, interviews for almost nine, more than 9 months now, and rarely do I get new questions that have the kind of subtle perspective that you're putting here. So thank you for this. Um,
It's welcome.
so I think Twin Peaks, to me, Catherine and Twin Peaks are so deeply connected and they're aligned to each other. I never had met Mark Frost before I sat down for an interview with him, but I felt very close to him during that interview because we share a lot of common goals and because I realized how much I'd been affected by him as an audience member over the years through Twin Peaks. Um, and you think of Twin Peaks, you think of David Lynch, you think of the actors. I know Mark Frost is there, but he was a really essential part of creating what that was and making it possible for David to dig into the intimacy of the stories by keeping this larger structure going. Mark Frost's background, he worked on Hill Street Blues, which was a Stephen Bochco show, which was very interesting to me. And I don't know that other critics or critics at all. I'm not a critic, but critics would agree with me. But it seemed to me that the only place you had multi characters with multi storylines going on simultaneously prior um, to Hill Street Blues was in soap opera where you'd have, seven romances going on. Every character's got something going on, and every day there's a little bit of a twist, and then things move forward. Those were not, I mean, soap operas are emotional mush to me, and they're not looking at the bigger issues. They're looking at the sort of interscene personal relationships between people, and that's not that interesting ultimately, unless there's a larger, sort of arc going. And that's what Hill Street Blues did, is it took that format of multiple characters and multiple storylines, but made them meaningful and relevant and interacting with each other. It was a great show. And Mark Frost cut his teeth on that show under Stephen Bochco. So when he and David got together, David's specificity, his depth, deep going into a particular area or a particular feeling and exploring that, mixed with Mark's ability to take that and use structure and other characters to build it out, became this magic thing, which goes beyond the immediate story. Yes, it's about who killed Laura Palmer is the primary story, but it's the people and their ongoing lives and the fact that questions aren't answered, but they're asked. To me, Twin Peaks continues to stimulate people because it's asking questions that we all relate to. Ray Wise does a brilliant job as Leland Palmer in this film and going from a distraught father to finding out that he's a crazy man at some point, right? But every step of the way, he's real. He's experiencing what he's in an authentic, honest way. Even when it gets outrageous, it's authentic and it's honest and it relates to us on that level. Catherine was essential to Twin Peaks, both in the doing of it, from what I hear from the other actors on the set, that Catherine was a force of nature on that set, having known David since Eraserhead days. Subsequent to Twin Peaks, Catherine traveled for 25 years to every festival, Twin Peaks Festival or Comic-Con kind of thing, where she would bring the log as long as she could, and then little logs when the TSA wouldn't let her take it on the plane. Um, John Thorne, a great publisher of the Wrapped in Plastic magazine and co-publisher of the Blue Rose magazine and author of some wonderful books. Just a real intellectual, but very much man of the people. He's a really great guy. He says in our film that Catherine was the biggest fan of Twin Peaks, and I believe it. She traveled with this, and largely it's her and Charlotte Stewart and just the fans themselves that kept this alive for 25 years, that made a large media company like Showtime make this huge investment uh, with no strings attached investment to give David the opportunity to really tell that story the way he wanted to tell it at the end. So I think Catherine was just an essential part of it as an ambassador, and she had an ability, and I witnessed this myself. we were just as a note, Catherine and I were not close, right? We knew each other since I guess I was 20 when I met her when I came down from San Francisco. And I describe it as we were cousins in a huge family, and it was a theatrical family that tied us all together. And that family still exists. People are dying off because they were all 7 or 8 years older than me. Um, but it still exists, and it was a warm and wonderful thing for many, many decades. Um, so I think that her commitment to Twin Peaks and her ability to pull people together uh, and it the theatrical part of it comes from her days at Disneyland when she was playing Snow White and in a costume relating to people on the street. That kind of a character relating to an audience member is a real interesting relationship because you both know that you're a character and you both know that the other person is not an actor. And yet, for those moments, a real human, a real child or an adult can look at the character and relate on that level. Catherine was able to carry that log and be at these events and be Catherine, but still carry as Catherine, sort of the portrait and the strength of the log lady. So you find people relating to her in both ways. I think that's really, really powerful. And I think that's, largely her legacy. And, I like to attribute the fact that season three exists largely to Catherine's effort, enthusiasm, and commitment to both David and to the character and the story.
Certainly. Yeah. Um, I remember watching the entirety of Twin Peaks back when I was in college, so 4 or 5 years ago. And the return, so the third season of Twin Peaks, it was set like 25 or 26 years after the finale of, say, season two ended, which, yeah, it's fair to say left everybody wanting more. And it's an 18-hour and show, and it
Like an
every
eight.
episode just keeps, uh, bringing me more and keeping me impressed and hooked. And of course, you cannot tell Twin Peaks without the Lock Lady. And this is what I was really struck by in your movie too, is that you spend, I think, roughly the second half of the movie, the documentary, um, unfolding the story of how they, the filmmakers, got um, Catherine to play the Lock Lady for the final time. And I believe she passed away like days after her scene was filmed. So,
Literally.
so the commitment was incredible. Like you cannot have Twin Peaks without the Lock Lady.
And I think she knew that, maybe more than anyone else knew it. And I mean, that's the hook of the story. When I heard that, the day Catherine died, I got a call from Donna Dubane, um, who missed her opportunity to go up and be at Catherine's house. She had some other commitments in LA, missed the ride up, and felt, I think wrongly so, that had she gone there, they would have told her to go away. I think they would have welcomed her, but that's what she felt, and she didn't make that trip. She had two kids, grandchildren that she was doing, and a job that was really important. But she she and everyone else that was there at that time knew how important this was to Catherine. I don't think anybody realized how important it was to Twin Peaks, to David, and to David's, ability to tell his story the way he wanted to tell it. It's an extraordinary tale. What happens at the end is just so amazing, and it happens so quickly. You just see people, rising to the occasion. I'll tell you a story that makes me think of that. That happened yesterday. Um, I one our executive producer Jane Albachet, wonderful, just generous and intelligently, just wonderful lady. She felt that the documentary was so unique that we should apply for, we should qualify for an Academy Award. And I laughed. I just said, come on, me, my film, this film, the film is great, but me, as a direct, no, no, no. And she felt that one of the songs, Some Believe, would certainly qualify. And I just, in humility and and maybe just insecurity just thought this was a ridiculous idea. But she talked to a couple of our backers and they wanted to do this. So the backers came up with the cash to do a 1 week qualifying run in Los Angeles. To qualify for an Academy Award, you have to do a week in one of 5 cities, 3 shows a day. And then it doesn't cost you anything to submit. You can submit anything you want for that. So we did that. We spent the cash, it was given to us. We spent the money. And the deadlines for documentaries were a little confusing. And we thought 3 weeks ago we had missed the date. And everybody was very upset. I was upset because I thought, well, God, the backers gave us extra money for this. David Israel, one of our primary guys, had really stepped up, and I felt terrible, but we could still get the song in. So I said, go, go, go. And then it turns out the song was contingent upon the date for the documentary, and we couldn't get in at all. And Jane Albuchet got on the telephone and talked to the Academy, and lo and behold, the Academy said, you're right, this was a little misleading. You got till tomorrow. So yesterday, the deadline was 5 o'clock, and we hit it at 4:57. And what it took was a guy named Russo Anastasio, who I've known for 30, 40 years now. He was the first trained Avid engineer. Avid is a digital software editing for video in LA, owned a wonderful studio for many years, and has just been there on this project from the beginning. Just, you do a project this big with over 65 interviews and hundreds of hours of footage of plays and of Twin Peaks. It's a lot to coordinate. I mean, we have 32 terabytes of solid material that we've backed up a couple of times. And Russo was there every step of the way. A young man named Dustin Limegruber, who we brought in as an assistant editor and now is doing editorial for us on projects as well. He was there. Jake Blue Note, who's just one of our composers and a brilliant guy, best musician I ever met, and also just very smart, technical guy, can, learn anything. He was there. And Jane and I. Now, this is going on, right? All day yesterday, we had 3 people on Zoom and people on the phones talking to each other through Zoom. At one point, the woman from the Academy Music Department called Jane back, and she's on the phone with Jane, and Jane is on the Zoom, and I can hear the woman, and I'm on the phone with Russo, and we put the phones near the Zoom, and people were communicating to get this done because everybody was committed to getting it done because we believe in the film and because we started and these are the kind of people that get their teeth into something and damn it, they're going to finish it. It reminded me of what happened in that last 24 hours with Catherine when everyone that was involved came together and just made the extraordinary effort. And I believe that one and one if you're two, if the one is a creative person and the other is a creative person, it doesn't make two. It makes three or four or six. It just can expand. And this was one of the most exciting and humbling as a director and as a songwriter because they're doing it about my stuff to get it in to qualify for an Academy Award. That's crazy. But just watching it and participating in it was very powerful and I think was a little bit of what everybody felt when they came together to help Catherine, do this final role, which is so powerful in The Return. And anybody who's seen The Return, those Log Lady scenes break your heart, but touch you in a different way. The tears, for me, I've been crying for since I started this project in a way that, as a macho '60s guy, I never used to do, because not because of sadness, but because of empathy because of how moved I am at the human experience. And I literally have changed my whole life has changed since making this film because of the look that I've had to do in my own life and the look at their lives and that process.
Yeah, well, I wish you the best with the Academy Awards process.
Who knows? But what a cool idea.
Yeah, and if by any miracle it does get shortlisted, well, you heard it from here first.
Yep. I would love that. Yeah. Thank you.
I would be remiss if I, didn't use this conversation to pay tribute to David Lynch in some way, shape, or form, who was an interviewee of the documentary. You know, as I reflect upon some of his works, which deeply impressed me, all of them, even the Dune movie, actually. Um, I find that one of the qualities that made David Lynch who he is his ability to inspire people to trust him and trust his vision. And of course, Catherine was one of them. So, how do you suppose David was able to do that?
I've thought about this a bunch of times. As a director, it's what you want. You want everybody on your team following, following your lead and joyously running, whatever race we have to run to get that shot. Um, One of the things that comes to mind when you ask this question is just David, who he was in his life, right? How he approached his life. And, we were not close friends. I knew him since I was 20. We collaborated. See it as collaboration on three projects, starting with, David Lynch Presents a Next Step Studios production, I Don't Know Jack, The Unsolved Life and Homicide of Eraserhead star Jack Nance, long title. And then Mulholland Drive, my role as the magician. And then, of course, I Know Catherine, which he was the first interview I conducted on this. And his enthusiasm for the project and for telling Catherine's story, not just the Twin Peaks side. He was really adamant. We both felt this, that the story was larger than Twin Peaks and it would relate to a larger group of people. And Twin Peaks is kind of the setting of the story, but not the thrust of the story. The thrust of the story is, commitment and friendship and love and death and life and how we live it and all of that. Um, David seems to me to have been a singular artist in his focus. You hear stories of Eraserhead. He knew what he wanted to do. There wasn't like, let's get together and write this thing and explore it and it's human nature and bring a bunch of people in to give us comments and how do we make it better. David knew what he wanted. He wanted to tell a very strange story in a very strange way, in a very specific way, and he did it. And it was his dedication and the purity of his vision, and I believe the confidence in his vision that he had that allowed Eraserhead to happen because that was 5, 6 years of people going and coming back. This small group of people made this movie and they stayed together. These are very talented people. Fred Elms has gone on to do, not only great films with David, but great films. He's a brilliant and exciting cinematographer. As have, many of the people that were in it, including Charlotte Stewart and Catherine and everyone. Jack Fisk has worked a lot, on and he was the designer. Um, so I think it's his singular vision. It's you kind of rally around a quarterback who's not just successful, but who's confident in his vision. And that's to me what David is, and not closed. Mulholland Drive is to me a great example of how open he was to ideas, right? I got a call from him while we were making I Don't Know Jack. I hadn't talked to him in decades. I wanted, as an actor, I was in Hollywood, but my confidence had been low. I'd kind of made this film, 7 Years Zigzag, tells the story of 7 years trying to start the new swing music movement in LA and London and getting very successful, but it ended on a terrible, rotten show at the Roxy that killed the project and got the money gone. And I was devastated and fell back on acting. And when Twin Peaks was being cast, I didn't make any phone calls to try and get to David. I didn't feel like I had any right to get into that show, and I never got an audition. And it always, I always bothered me. And here, years later, I get a call from David, and it was kind of interesting how it came down. Um, the night before this call had been my birthday. And I was leaving the studio. I had a studio behind my house. Donna Dubane, again, our producer, executive producer, and in the film, she we had just gotten new cell phones, and she had left at 6 o'clock. And at 7 o'clock, the phone rang, and it's Catherine Coulson calling from Ashland, Oregon, looking for Donna. And I give her Donna's new cell phone number. And the next day, I come in and I say, "Hey, Donna." What was Catherine calling about? Figuring it was about I Don't Know Jack, the documentary. And she said, well, David called her looking for this guy we used to know who was really good with words and used to be a magician. And the last time I'd seen David was 2 years before at Jack Nance's memorial. And he came up to me. We were both smoking cigarettes outside. He came up and he said, Richard, I remember you, but I don't remember how you knew Jack. And so I told him the story of getting hired for a fair outside of San Francisco to do my improvised verse act. And they told me they'd pay me double if I could come up with another character, another act. And I said, well, I used to be a magician and I designed this 12-foot gallows and I would hang myself. I wanted to hang myself on this magic act. And they thought that was great. And they gave me the money to build it and a van to drive it out there and paid me this. I was delighted. And the magician character was this evil, dark magician called the Great Abraxor. And I would insult the audience, and then they would hang me at the end. I'd pretend to be dead, and it was a whole deal. So now, 2 years later, I get this call from David. Richard, I've been thinking about you for trying to find a role for you for 30 years. I got one. It's a dark magician on stage, and he told me a little bit about it. We didn't talk for long, and he said at the end of the conversation, he said, "Can you do costumes tomorrow?" It was Friday afternoon. Can you do costumes on Saturday? Yes. Can you shoot on Monday morning? Yes, I'll be there. Can you send me the script? No, but I'll send you the sides. So sent me these sides. And the last thing in the conversation, just, oh, Richard, um, I also wanted it in French and Spanish too. And I'm like, what? Do you have a translator? He said, here's my home number. He gave me his home number. Still the same number, by the way. And he said, call me tomorrow. We'll find a translator. And I called and I got the machine. So I called a friend who spoke fluent French and a friend who spoke fluent Spanish. And I basically, over the telephone, read them the line in English, and they would give me options. You could say it this way in French, you could say it this way in French, or this way in Spanish, and this way. And I would choose the options. So now I typed that all up, and my 7-page script is now like 23 pages. And it was a Sunday afternoon. And I had to remember 23 pages by next morning at 9 o'clock or 6 o'clock when I was supposed to get there to the set. And I still am surprised that every time I tell the story to think that I had the temerity, the guts to do this, but I decided I was going to make it one and that I would use a little Spanish and French and English and when and how. If you imagine the great Duke Ellington writing Satin Doll, this great, melody, right? And then handing it over to Billy Strayhorn, who was his arranger. And Billy Strayhorn took this great melody and decided when it would be drums and when it would be saxophone or trumpet or trombone or whatever it was in the arrangement. So I was the Billy Strayhorn David's um, to David's Ellington in this case. So I arrive on the set. I'm fully dressed I'm in makeup. I'm in costume. I don't go in to the set from the back of the theater. I go on to the set from the stage door. So I literally walked onto that stage that was already lit, and the blue-haired lady was already in the booth up there, and David was, out there in the darkness. I could see the balcony with Naomi and Laura Lena Herring up there, and there were other people up there. And I walked. David said, "Richard, hello, how are you?" Da, da, da. And I said, "David, here's the English, Spanish, and French version. It's 23 pages, and here's this 10-page version that I kind of put it together." And he said, "Well, Richard, let's see it." And I did it. And that's what you see. So David was able to take a complete different script. I mean, it was so different than just the English, but he was open. He was a collaborator. He knew what he wanted. And he didn't, he didn't scratch his head and go, "Well, I don't know. What do you think?" It was great. Let's shoot it. Bang. And we shot it with one little move he asked me to make. That was it. So I find that the collaboration process, the openness, um, that David had was essential. I also think, and this is my theory, kind of other people kind of agree with it sometimes, but I don't know. I haven't really talked about it much. Catherine grew up in Disneyland. She was like, 7 years old when her father opened the park. He was the head of PR. And she played characters and met all the famous people and then eventually helped run the Aunt Jemima Pancake House. And that experience of of making people happy during a meal at the Pancake House or relating to a customer, an audience member as Snow White if she was playing Snow White at a particular point, that informed how she operated. Also, theater is a wonderful experience in community. You can't do a play if everybody's not there at the right time because somebody's not going to walk on though. Everything stops. The light doesn't happen. The cue doesn't happen from sound. Everything stops. If that telephone doesn't ring when it's supposed to ring, how can you pick it up? It's right. So the collaborative nature of theater and the respect that men and women share, there may be a hierarchy still in the who gets to produce and who gets to direct theater, but on the stage, it doesn't make any difference gender, race, age, or anything else. You're playing your role, somebody else is playing your role. If you're not both committed, it doesn't work. So there's this incredibly open sense amongst theater people and sort of support of it. Also, you're working odd hours, you're doing late night plays or rehearsals. So who do you socialize with when you're not working? It's the people that are still awake and in the neighborhood. So theater really builds community. And I think that David was deeply impacted by Catherine's approach to working with people. I wonder if just his dedication and artistry alone would have kept people together for those 5 years when nobody was getting paid or everybody was getting paid like $1, literally almost nothing, to stay and do Eraserhead. I think that impacted him a great deal.
Yeah. Well, I had the great fortune of watching Mulholland Drive. I think 2 months ago, I was visiting Warsaw, Poland, and I spotted a
Oh,
theater
wow.
that does a 4K restoration of the film, and so I took the opportunity. I think it was my third or fourth time, and I guess this is where I should ask: Were you that? Did you play the guy that says what "No hey banda, no hey orchestra" in the Club Silencio scene with?
Yes, I am the magician. I
All right.
am Noah Bondar. Somebody called me Bondar in an article. Yeah, I am. And that's the story that I was telling you about writing that script and what he wanted and why it's in three different languages and how it got to be. And that, to me, that just illustrates David's openness, his surety of what he's doing. And when he sees something, I've done a lot of voiceover, and one of the things I always say to producers when I'm working with them is a good producer is someone who knows what they want when they hear it, that they're open enough, they can give you specific direction, so you go in a direction they want you to go. But when they hear it, they know it. They're tuned to themselves. And David was that way. When I showed him that, he just knew that that was what he wanted. And the last thing he said to me at the end of our interview that day, so long ago, was, uh, "You're a great magician, Richard." And it just, you know,
Yes. What struck me in that very recent uh, viewing of Mulholland Drive was that it took me like 3 or 4 times to know that that song that Rebecca Del Rio, rest in peace to her, was actually a Spanish rendition of Roy Orbison's "Is Crying."
yes.
So I never noticed that. Like up
Yeah,
until that,
it has its own life is
yes,
why I mean, you hear the melodies immediately, right? But just the first time I heard it was after I had done my scenes. I did a rehearsal for him. I showed him the thing, and then we shot it just twice, and then I just sort of stood off to the side as they went through the rest of the Silencio scene. And in that theater, this is the Tower Theater in downtown Los Angeles. It's now an Apple store. I'm sad to say, only because they raised the floor and it doesn't have its majesty or its crustiness. I mean, that was a funky old theater with red curtains. Red curtains that looked exactly like what David used to see me performing in front of, you know, 40 years before, 30 years before. Um, Hearing it in that room with these enormous speakers they had brought in, and it's a perfect recording. John Neff was David's recording engineer, designed his studio, built it. And the day Rebecca came in, according to John and Rebecca, uh, David said, "Well, I'd love to hear you sing." And so she got up, walked into the isolation booth in front of a new Neumann U87 or something like that microphone, and sang it. And what you hear in Mulholland Drive is what she sang for David that day. That recording is what is used in the film. I asked John Neff when we were in Cannes together. If he had to change it, what did he do to the thing? And he said all he did was there was one, she took one extra breath or something. There was like one beat that was a little longer than the others, and he tightened it up. That's all he did to that recording. It's fabulous. Um, and she was fabulous. I did not realize she was lip syncing that day until she stopped singing. I had the same effect that we do in the audience. We watch it, we think she's singing, and then she stops and it's going on, and then she collapses, and it's like, oh. Um, I must tell you that, Rebecca's death in May, I believe, um, was kind of as shocking as the collapse in the movie. It was, I think, for all of us who knew her and had worked with her, and I was in touch with her a lot over the last couple of years. Our closing credits song in I Know Catherine the Log Lady. It's quite an emotional sequence. There's a song called Some Believe, and that's me and Rebecca doing a duet on that song in the movie. And she's an amazing singer, tragically passing at too early of an age and having a difficult life. It's very, very hard for musicians today with Spotify and all these, programs, streaming programs. Just, people are making an average of $12 a month as musicians, and you can't survive on that for a day in this world, much less a week or a month, and continued. So musicians have it tough, and she had a very, very hard time toward the end of her life. Um, and it's tragic, but her music lives on, and I often think that had she been born 30 years earlier, in the 1950s and 60s, there were supper clubs all over this country that would pay an artist like that a couple of $1,000s a night to come and sing because they were so good and would bring the people in, would come. There wasn't millions of TV shows. There was three networks. It was a very different entertainment environment, and the money that we all need to sustain our lives didn't just sit at the top at a couple of, uh, software companies. It filtered down to real people. There were big bands that toured the country that made a decent living.
Okay. Well, I'd like to conclude on this note. How does Catherine inspire you?
Man, every day. There's a Connie, who's her niece. And in our film, by the way, there's a three-part miniseries version of this film. We started that way. The economic environment for documentaries and films, in the last couple of years changed dramatically after COVID. So we decided that we needed to release it as a feature and that we'd have more traction with it. I'm really glad we did. I think it works effectively. But there's a lot of material that you don't get to see. And one of the stories that's told in the three-part is that Connie, on her way up to the funeral for Catherine, which happened, a little bit after she died, um, felt that Catherine was in the car with her and saying, if ever you have a question or you don't know what to do, just ask what would Catherine do. And when she got to the funeral, she talked to one of her cousins who said that the last time she'd seen Catherine, Catherine had said those very words to her. So around our team, even some of our passwords always have WWCD. What would Catherine do? And I think about her daily because I think that, she lived a consciously committed life. She was a lusty, creative, caring, loving person who meditated pretty much throughout her entire life, found that balance. She and David had started together, as you know. And I think, just looking at any situation out of empathy and compassion for the people involved and for myself in any given situation, realizing how human we are and that our job is to try and make things smooth for all of us, not file off the rough edges. The rough edges are important. Who killed Laura Palmer? It's death. It's murder. It's not a smooth, happy, happy, happy. But it's looking at things from the reality of knowing that we're all just vulnerable. And if we can be honest with that, we can have such better relations. She is deeply missed in all the facets of her life, including up in Ashland, Oregon, because she was the peacekeeper. She could help bring sides together because she could relate. I think it's empathy that I get from Catherine and the value of it more than anything else. And, personally, gratitude, because once I decided to do this, all sorts of things have come my way, which I'd never experienced in my life before. I'm a lucky man. I've been able to work on a brilliant project with brilliant people for a number of years, and to see now, I've seen it we've screened in over 100 different screens over the last 9 months. And I've been to a lot of those screenings with audiences and talking to them, and it's constantly the same thing. It's laughter, it's tears, more laughter, and then a conversation about what is important in life. So for me, Catherine makes me just thinking about her makes me aware, and I think as she's deepened my empathy for other people, I've been crying a lot, not because I miss her, but because I just feel the 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 sweetness and the bitterness, the stuff of life, the stuff that makes you and I be able to look into each other's eyes and go, yeah, yeah, good question, man. Thank you for asking it. And I know this is our last question, so I'll say thank you for asking all these questions. I've enjoyed looking at these things together with you. Thank you.
And thank you, Richard Green, for joining the show.